Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next The Promised Neverland episode review. This one's going to be for episode 3. And another, I think, good episode. I don't, like kind of last week, I don't think it was anything, overly amazing. I think this isn't a perfect adaptation, I think is what we're beginning to realize here. I've seen a few complaints already just in the initial reaction to this episode of people not being the most happy, satisfied with how they're doing it, just because they seem to be skipping over a lot of small pieces of information, but like little bits that really add to the depth of the series. I don't want to talk about it here if you haven't read the manga, in case they decide to do some weird adaptation thing where they reveal that sort of information later on. But if you have read the manga, you'll probably know already a handful of scenes with key information that they haven't done yet. A good example of this would be something where they bring up a piece of information in this episode, the year 2015, yet don't give any explanation for like how they necessarily would know that. The manga actually explains it I wouldn't say it goes in a massive amount of depth, but it shows that the books that they're reading, they kind of roughly figure out, okay, so they're getting their dates from the fact that they know that at the very least books have been published up to this date and stuff like that. I think that just helps to add the fact that, look, they're living on this farm. Suddenly they realize how limited the information is, and they would begin to figure that stuff out. That, I think, really added to the whole, the cleverness of the top 3 of the class kind of figuring that out. Ray primarily here. I thought that would have been just a really cool scene to add in, of just an explanation of where he came up with that year. Is it particularly important? I don't know, it's maybe questionable. I think it fits in with the tone and atmosphere of the series, as opposed to just him suddenly revealing to us what date it is. Whereas I think it was clearly part of the mystery of the series that they suddenly realized when their kind of world was shattered, they don't know anything. Suddenly their home has all of these mysteries to it. Suddenly they realize, why don't we know what's going on in the outside world? The exact year, what date it is, the society outside. Why don't we know any of that stuff? And this was just a little thing to add on to that, in addition to some of the stuff that already has kind of happened. Another thing I've seen a good amount of people kind of talking about at this point is already the inner monologue, and how the manga is fairly heavy with it, and we're not really getting any of that here. And you could sort of see in this episode an example of that, in that the scene of Sister Crone talking to the doll wasn't actually in the manga, but it's their way of basically having her inner monologue of her plan, because of course, who's she going to say it to otherwise, if she can't just say it in her head? So they make up this kind of visual thing for her to say it, but also has to have her speaking out loud. I think, people can understand you just put a slight effect on the focus on the character just thinking, sitting there or something like that. Inner monologue, you can do that. Looking at a good example of a show that did it very well was Death Note, where you could have a 10-minute sequence of just Light and Elle kind of in the same scene each other, just staring at each other. Probably a good example of that would be the scene where they're playing tennis with each other. In that, visually, of course, they're having a tennis match, but in their heads, they're having this battle of trying to outthink each other. And that's the key to the scene, more so than what's actually happening physically on the tennis court. And I think they should just go ahead and do some inner dialogue if they have to. Who cares if it maybe visually isn't the best, or maybe doesn't come across the best in anime? It's part of the series that, they're thinking things out really well. They're trying to figure things out, which we got in this episode with them figuring out that, okay, they look at the new girl who's just arrived in, the new baby, and they find out that her mark is still there from where the tracker was put in her, and they find out that it's behind the ear. So that immediately confirms to them, okay, they all have ones behind the ear, and as they grow up, it healed over, and so many of them wouldn't realize it was there. But they figure it out because a new child was brought in to replace Connie. So, that adds another thing onto their list, and they kind of realize that, okay, there's limitations to how Mom's tracker works, but we're still going to have to deal with this eventually. And then similarly, yeah, the Sister Crone thing as a plot point in this episode I thought was very interesting, just the dynamic between, Crone and Isabella, of Isabella basically telling Crone that I'm not here to like teach you to be the next mom or anything like that. You're purely here to basically be an extra set of eyes, to just be a guard. I don't really care what's up with you. You're just here to do this thing for me. And Crone in the background, of course, realizing that, oh, Isabella isn't telling the higher-ups about what's happened here, that two of them know about the demons, basically. I can use that, I can manipulate things here so that I can get a promotion, get Isabella fired, and, I become the next mom. So, that is interesting, just the ambition of, the sisters to become moms, and it adds into the kind of hierarchy of how exactly does that work, because then we see Isabella later on in the episode over the radio talking to, her higher-ups, grandma, basically, and getting a report that, okay, they're ready to ship out whenever. The mention that ultimately it is to satisfy the higher-ups in Demon Society, but that her specifically having these three, basically, superior quality, kids there with the top scores, they are sort of being saved for this. They don't explain it, but what seems to be some sort of a demon ritual called the Tefari. And the demons, a quick scene of the demons talking about that this is going to be his feast, and they specifically refer to him as like, the one, their god, and that they're giving prayers to him. So the ruler of Demon Society, the god of Demon Society, whatever you want to call it, he is ultimately who I suppose Emma, Norman, and Ray are going to be like fed to. That's the plan. So it sort of puts a kind of countdown on the series, like that she wants to keep the deliveries going as normal, but says that they're ready to ship whenever you need them. This kind of festival for the demons or whatever is the thing that we're sort of counting down to. So they, as much as they're kind of preparing for their escape, as they begin to use the game of tag, basically, to train the others secretly to sort of improve their physical skills, so that when they all have to leave, they can actually do it together and get out. So there's still the problems, as Ray kind of points out, of like, we have some babies here who can't even walk. I know you want to save everyone, Emma, but can we? And that was sort of highlighted, I suppose, in Crone playing tag with everyone and her realizing the weaknesses of everyone. That with Norman, it's his lack of physical strength. With Ray, it's that he maybe quits a bit too early. And with Emma, it's her naivete and the fact that she kind of cares too much about people, and that she picked up two of the younger kids and ran off with them, when maybe she could have also been one of the ones to survive the game, the 20-minute time limit on it. As for the game of tag, it was animated very well for kind of just being a game of tag with a bit of kind of mild parkour involved. But it was to get across the idea that, I suppose, Crone realizing that she's seen a lot of stuff in maybe other farms, but this is like the top farm, and so the top of the top farm are actually really, really skilled. They get high scores in the test, full marks, and they're actually really good physically as well. Even Norman manages to kind of survive this game of tag. And the big, I suppose, reveal towards the end is that Crone reveals to Emma that she's on her side and asks her, kind of just says it out loud, the harvest, because she's with two younger kids, so they wouldn't necessarily know what that means, but to her it's very meaningful. So Crone definitely is this kind of new thing that sort of changed the dynamic within the series now, of like, suddenly Emma now realizes like, what's going to happen here. Like, Crone directly is saying that she knows kind of that Emma at the very least was one of them. And what does being on her side mean? And we know that Crone isn't just, siding with Mom and going about things normally, she may be using Emma to, beat Isabella to get her position. So a lot of interesting stuff going on in the background, even if, on the outside, like, the episode doesn't seem like did a ton happen in it, but you're seeing the gradual setup of a lot of these kind of stuff that's making just the overall atmosphere in the house extremely tense, because at the end, of course, we get the reveal that they pretty much figure out that, okay, Mom isn't being active at all much recently. Crone, apart from the game of tag, hasn't done anything. There must be a spy among us kids. And it's the shocking reveal that potentially someone has betrayed them. And this episode, Crone, and just visually with the shots that they choose, they seem to be trying to say that Gilda might be the one who is spying for Mom and Crone. So we'll see how that exactly plays out. But yeah, I think that's most of what I want to say about this episode. Like, I'm enjoying the anime a lot. I think for me, even in the manga, it probably took, the first chapter aside, because most mangas have a pretty good first chapter. It probably took until the first big sort of twist in the story, that's kind of, I think, still to come, for me to really get hooked. So I think it's one of those ones where, like, if you're just watching this for the first time, definitely wait until you get to, like, a bigger character moment kind of coming up before you kind of make your decision about if you do or do not like the series. Because once they get into that, suddenly everything becomes, I think, a lot more interesting. A lot of these plots that are beginning to become activated, suddenly everything is in play. Like, they're planning an escape. There's kind of bad blood between Isabella and Crone, who is the traitor in the house. What are they going to do about the tracking chips? All these sort of things begin to come all into play. So I think they're overall doing a good job at setting up most of these plots, but I think they would have, I think, been better suited to actually be a little bit more accurate to the manga and add more depth to what's going on here, and utilize the fact that you have a more thoughtful kind of thinking anime here, manga, with the source material. Make it that. Because you don't have a ton of action, as this episode sort of showed. A game of chase tag, basically, was your key action scene. So what you're going off is basically, primarily, what you're getting people in to watch it with is how tense the atmosphere is, the overall mysteries of the world, and also, I suppose, the approach of, smart kids, figuring all this stuff out, coming up with plans. And so inner dialogue is kind of, in a way, needed for that. So hopefully the episodes kind of become hopefully they use that information and it hasn't just been all skipped past, but we'll see where they go. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on episode 3. But that's been my thoughts. That's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.